Well, earlier I spoke to Volker Turk, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. I began by asking him to respond to claims by the Israeli Prime Minister and others in his government that there is no starvation in Gaza.
Look at the pictures that we see every day. Look at the reports that you hear from my colleagues from the United Nations, from the humanitarian colleagues. They talk about the fact that the aid hasn't come in any meaningful way for the last couple of weeks. We need at least 400 trucks of massive humanitarian assistance to go in. That hasn't happened. So yes, there is a very, very serious humanitarian situation in Gaza. And it unfortunately has affected children, it has affected women, it has affected not only malnutrition, but we have these reports of starving children.
And today, even in the last few days, President Trump has said things like, children look hungry, you cannot fake these images. But in your view, is that enough? I mean, we continue to hear condemnation from the international community, but it doesn't really make Israel change its position.
I think we need to move from a global outcry to concrete action. And concrete action means, and I mentioned it yesterday in a very strong call ahead of the conference that is taking place in New York today about the two-state solution, is actually to put pressure on this Israeli government to change course. We need a permanent ceasefire. We need massive humanitarian aid to come in. We need the release of all hostages, but we need all of this now. Not tomorrow, we need it now.
There are some who are criticizing this lead that France is taking to recognize eventually Palestinian statehood, saying that perhaps they're starting at the end of the process and there is a lot that needs to be done before the Palestinians get to statehood. For example, the ceasefire that you're talking about, getting aid to those who need it, putting an end to this current situation in Gaza. What are your views?
I mean, it is so important to focus on the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people. And I welcome the conference because it brings us back to where the solution lies for Israelis and Palestinians to live side by side in peace. The only way to do it is through a two-state solution. That's been the position of the international community all along. And when you are in war, and in the horrors of war, we forget what the actual solution is. And we need to find the peace precisely to achieve a political solution of this kind. So yes, it is important to focus on what brings an end to this unspeakable suffering that we see.
So what would you say to President Trump? What would you ask him to do in this moment?
War is not the answer. We need peace. We need to bring back a political solution to a decade-old problem and a conflict that really needs to find an end. Because the only way for both communities to live side by side is through a political solution, a two-state solution that I hope this conference will at least get the political momentum behind it so that we can find that solution in the end.
And what we're seeing at the moment, though, in Gaza, and we've spoken a little bit about this, is the humanitarian catastrophe, as Keir Starmer has described it. We continue to see the pushback from this Israeli government. And the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation says what they're doing is sufficient.
Well, it is absolutely not sufficient. We know that we need massive humanitarian aid. You have seen over the last day or so, there is a bit of a change on the part of the Israeli authorities when it comes to this, but it's still not enough, by no means enough. There needs to be massive humanitarian assistance that has to go in. There is a UN coordination system that works. Why not use this to the fullest? And that's what we're asking.
Yes, and Israeli officials and the GHF have pointed the finger of blame on the UN, saying that the aid convoys are there, but the UN is not distributing it properly and effectively.
So I can tell you one thing. The UN is ready to do its job, has always been ready to do its job if we are allowed to do it. And that's the big ask. Let us do our work. Let our colleagues, the humanitarian colleagues, let the NGOs that are working with us do our work. We had 400 distribution centers. We can activate this, but we need not red tape. And we need not blockage, we need unhindered humanitarian access now.
You've also criticised the UK's ban on Palestine action. Just tell me why.
The label of terrorism is a very grave one. It should not be confused with freedom of expression, freedom of protest, freedom of assembly. What we have seen with the banning of Palestine action is a chilling effect on what is a legitimate exercise of human rights, because when it comes to declaring anyone a terrorist or a terrorist act, it has to be in relation to grave bodily harm. It needs to inflict terror in the population. None of this is the case with Palestine action. So I think one has to be making a very clear distinction between what terrorist offenses are on the one hand and what issues of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and protest are.
And just finally, Mr. Volker, how would you describe the current situation in Gaza?
Beyond dystopian. It's one of those situations within my own long life career with the United Nations where words fail me.